Tammy Schneider, and I am the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities at Claremont Graduate University. And on behalf of the Mormon Studies program, the Department of Religion, the School of Arts and Humanities, and Claremont Graduate University, I would like to welcome all of you to Claremont today for what is sure to be, and tomorrow, a great conference. I confess this is my favorite part of the job. I get to welcome everyone to what is sure to be an amazing conference that I did not plan. And that is all thanks to Lisa Maldonado and Patrick Mason, who I know is here. There he is. The red hair is always the giveaway, right? Honoring our truly beloved, admired, and esteemed friend and colleague, Armand Mauss, who not only helped build a library of research, which is out in the lobby for sale, and just the number of books is truly impressive. Never mind the quality, which you have to actually open to get to. But not only the Library of Research and Literature on the topic of Mormon Studies, but Armand was also a major builder in our program for Mormon Studies and still serves as one of our more active council members. We are very proud of our Mormon Studies program and the conference that is part of it. We were the first to have a Mormon Studies program outside the state of Utah. And while the University of Virginia copied us fairly soon after and decided to name it after the very deserving Richard Bushman, not only did we hire Richard Bushman first, but we were also smart enough to hire Claudia as well. And speaking of Claudia, it is also exciting that we begin the conference with the publication of the new book on women in Mormonism, essays from the Claremont Oral History Collection, Mormon Women Have Their Say, edited by both Claudia Bushman and Caroline Klein, who is also a student in our program. We also have for sale War and Peace in Our Time, Mormon Perspectives, edited by Patrick Mason, David Pulsifer, and Richard Bushman. I think you've heard of him also. Sorry, Richard, but it's a big deal. So this is a very personal conference, and it is also a very academic and scholarly conference, and this is a really big deal, and we are very proud of it and the impact that it has made, not just on Mormon studies, but on all the cognate fields as well. All of my bragging aside, the point of this conference, having a Mormon Studies program and scholarly literature on the topic to boot, is all to say that it is shocking that it has taken the Academy so long to recognize that the study of Mormonism deserves a place at the academic table, just as the other religions traditionally taught in the academic setting. Such a program in a setting like CGU not only helps us to better understand Mormonism, but other religions and the whole notion of religion at all. So thank you for attending. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Armand. I was going to add a paragraph about you, but then I decided that everyone here came to talk about you, so I will just let them have their say and just say what an honor and privilege it is to work with you, and I'm thrilled that we have an opportunity to look at your work as a topic as a whole. Thank you. Golden Child, Patrick Mason.
I think that is what it says in my contract. So that's official. So greetings and welcome. This is just terrific to see so many of you here on a Friday morning. Thank you for being here. And this is really an honor and shows that what we're doing here at Claremont in terms of establishing Mormon studies as an important scholarly endeavor that also acts as an interface between the academy and the religious community and the public. It shows that we're doing something important and that is valued. I want to welcome all of you here today with special recognition to some of our guests. Of course, Dr. Armand Mauss and his wife Ruth. Members of the Mauss family, many of whom traveled far to get here. How many members of the Mauss family do we have here? Do you want to raise your hand? All right. Thanks for being here, some of their children and other relatives. Thanks to Dean Tammy Schneider for being here and being for such a terrific support for the program. Also, we have here Steve Bradford. Where's Steve? They're in the back. Steve is the chairman of our Mormon Studies Council. and Vice Chairman of the Howard W. Hunter Foundation, which funds the Hunter Chair, which I hold, as well as, importantly, graduate fellowships for students who are interested in studying Mormonism, as well as providing the programmatic funds for events like this. So thanks to Steve and all of the members of the Mormon Studies Council, several of whom are here this morning. And thanks also to the CGU students, who are really the lifeblood of the program and are the reason why we're here as educators and as members of the Academy. I'm also really grateful to the institutions and individuals who have provided funding for this conference. Those names are printed in your program that you can see. Of course, the main sponsor is the Mormon Studies Council, but we also had a number of individuals who stepped up and said that this is something that they valued, this is something that they wanted to support, both because of, some of them because of their relationship to Armand, but just in general because they wanted to support what we're doing here in terms of Mormon studies. So thank you to all of you who have provided support for this conference in particular, but our program in general, especially for our student fellowships. And I want to extend really a special thanks to the leadership of Claremont Graduate University. President Debbie Freund will be having lunch at her home tomorrow, and she'll greet us there. And also to Dean Schneider, both of whom have just been terrific supports and enthusiastic supporters of our program. Also, a very hearty thank you to the stressed out Lisa Maldonado, who's stalking around in As you all know, things like this don't get done without people like Lisa. She does it with grace, she does it with class, and with professionalism, so thank you, Lisa, for all you do. My research assistant, Amanda Pumphrey, has helped with this. She couldn't be here this morning because she's taking a language exam, so I think she's stressing about Spanish or something like that right now. And to the Claremont Mormon Studies Student Association, who's provided a lot of the behind-the-scenes volunteer labor for this. So thanks again to all of you who have contributed. We also, for those of you who are just coming in, we do have some seats here in the front that you're welcome to take. It's a happy problem to have all the seats filled up. So it's my pleasure to offer a few introductory remarks at the beginning of this conference. The idea for this conference occurred to me about a year ago as we concluded our weekend discussing Mormons in the marketplace, and I began to consider what would come next. Several possible topics ran through my mind. Perhaps Mormonism in the 20th century, which has received considerably less attention than the early decades of the Mormon movement. Or maybe international Mormonism, another severely understudied area, especially in an era when, at least on the books, there are more Latter-day Saints outside the United States than inside. Or in this 35th anniversary year of the lifting of the LDS ban on those with African ancestry from the priesthood and the temple. Perhaps now would be the time to reassess what we know about the often tortured Mormon experience with race and what we might expect moving forward. As I considered these possibilities, the thought crossed my mind that all of these subjects, and many others, found coherence in the scholarly writings of Armand Mauss. When I realized that Armand would be celebrating his 85th birthday this year, and especially reflecting on how utterly indispensable he's been, not only to the field of Mormon studies, but also to the establishment of the Mormon Studies program and Howard W. Hunter Chair here at CGU, the deal was sealed, at least in my own head. Everyone I mentioned the idea to responded with immediate enthusiasm. But then came the hard part, getting Armand to agree to it. I think it's fair to say that he was a little flabbergasted by the whole idea, and it was not just a matter of false modesty. As late as 10 days ago, he was insisting that we refer to this as the Mormon Studies Conference, not the Armand Mauss Conference, as it informally had become known. He wondered aloud more than once why we should go to so much trouble to honor him and his career when, as he said, I was just doing my job. From the very beginning of the planning process, which he was intimately involved with, Armand insisted that the proceedings were not about him. Instead, he stipulated the proceedings might use his considerable body of work as a platform from which presenters would reflect on the state of the field of Mormon studies, and then to propose and demonstrate how we might move forward. Thus, a conference in honor of the career of Armand Mauss, is only the second subtitle, importantly preceded by his apt suggestion for the title, Beyond the Mormon Moment, Directions for Mormon Studies in the New Century. We all enjoyed, more or less, the Mormon moment, which for all intents and purposes ended the evening of November 6, 2012. Not to put too fine a point on it. The Mormon moment was good for Mormon studies. It raised the profile of Mormonism in universities, media outlets, churches, and living room conversations around the country. The fact that a devout Latter-day Saint was a serious contender for the White House made his religion a serious topic of conversation, even for people who find the religion's faith claims and history anything but serious. Like it or not, academics, journalists, and public intellectuals learned, Mormonism is a force to be reckoned with in this new century. Many of us in this room spent much of last fall and summer and spring and winter talking about Mormonism in almost every conceivable media outlet. Since the moment passed, the calls from the media have returned to being few and far between, and at least in my case, considerably less interesting. My last two media appearances dealt with a drunk driving senator and the seamy side of secret sex lives. Both topics that actually could have been part of a presidential campaign, but in this year, were not. The relevant question for us is, will the passing of all this media attention signal the end of the boom period for Mormon studies? Will funding for Mormon studies programs dry up? And will academic journals and university presses stop accepting, let alone seeking out, Mormon-themed manuscripts? My own view is that if Mormon studies atrophies as a scholarly field because the media and public have turned their attention elsewhere, then it wasn't much of a scholarly field to begin with. Academic work should never be driven by the 24-hour news cycle. Indeed, the precise value of academic scholarship is that in an age of self-styled experts shouting at each other over the scandal du jour, the time-honored mechanisms of careful, sustained study and peer review, at the very heart of what we mean by academic discipline, provide a necessary counterweight to all the silliness that passes for news and public information. Of course, that's not to say that academia doesn't have its own fair share of silliness, but the legitimacy, solidity, and sustainability of an academic discipline is by its very nature not determined by whether or not it recently placed its leading voices on The Daily Show. The worth of what we do in the academy cannot be measured simply by popularity or media attention. While the Mormon moment no doubt helped raise a modicum of awareness and respect for Mormon studies, I doubt that the New York Times, for instance, would have published a lengthy article surveying the latest developments in the field without Mitt Romney's candidacy or the Book of Mormon musical. In the end, the field must stand on its own 2 feet. Setting aside the partisan politics of it all, a Romney win, while providing a fascinating set of data for scholars to study for years to come, would have been a crutch for Mormon studies, with the field's scholarly legitimacy to some degree dependent on the shifting sands of popular politics. Over the past couple of years, most people were never really all that interested in Mormonism. They principally and sometimes exclusively were interested in what made candidate Romney tick. The temptation would have been for the same dynamic to overtake the Mormon studies community. A Romney presidency, I suggest, may have actually constrained some of the imaginative, creative, expansive, and critical work that Mormon studies needs as it continues to mature. If things had gone differently in November, practically every book, article, and conference related to Mormonism for the next 4 years and beyond would have felt obliged to at least partly refract its analysis through the lens of a Romney presidency. The research university, as our provost here at CGU is fond of saying, is one of humankind's greatest inventions. At the core of the university is the presumption that certain intellectual and aesthetic pursuits simply have intrinsic worth. They are not valuable because they're tied to politics, or because they make lots of money, or even provide grist for the latest Broadway hit. They're worthy because they're part of the human experience. This is what we do in the humanities and social sciences. We study the human condition, the good, the bad, the ugly. At its best, the Academy fiercely protects the deeply human value that we can dedicate ourselves to the study of something simply because we are drawn to it, and because we seek to better understand ourselves, our neighbors, our society, and our world. Some things are simply beautiful. Some things are simply interesting. Some things are simply meaningful for no greater reason than they simply are. We are all indebted to the miraculous results of applied research, but the Academy must also always preserve and protect the inherent worth of pure research. For much of 2012, many of us as Mormon Studies scholars and observers were necessarily and productively, I think, drawn into the realm of applied research. Insofar as we helped illuminate certain elements of contemporary religion, politics, and culture that were otherwise shrouded for the vast majority of the populace, this was immensely helpful and worthy of our time and efforts. But for Mormon Studies to thrive, especially in this post-Mormon moment, it must retain and clearly articulate a lively sense of its own intrinsic worth. We must continue to ask the big questions about how the study of Mormonism helps illuminate certain aspects of the human experience, and how Mormonism itself dares to offer new insights to all the big questions. And just as Joseph Smith sought to collapse the distance between heaven and earth, a Mormon Studies examination of how Mormonism approaches the big historical, theological, philosophical, political, sociological, economic, and ethical issues of our age helps collapse the distance between pure and applied research. If done correctly, it turns out that Mormon Studies is really only secondarily about Mormons and Mormonism. First and foremost, Mormon Studies must be about humans and humanity. These next 2 days we'll have before us a man who dedicated his career to better understanding the social dimensions of humans and humanity, often using Mormonism as his laboratory in which to study the broader phenomenon. Armand Mauss will be the first to tell you that he has lived a rather long time. And in that time, he not only witnessed firsthand, but also directly participated in and shaped the origins and development of what we now call Mormon Studies. He was there for the founding of the Mormon History Association. He was a charter subscriber to Dialogue and Sunstone. Just a few weeks ago, Jan Shipp stood at this podium and spoke about how the early 20th century Mormon intellectual community failed to sustain itself, whereas the late 20th century Mormon intellectual community, while sometimes suffering the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, has survived and even thrived. Why? One reason is that in the 1960s, when much of society was interested in tearing down institutions, Mormon intellectuals were building them. We are here today quite literally because of Armand Mauss and his fellow travelers, some of whom are in this room. As we look beyond the Mormon moment, it's essential for us to recognize that much of the reason why there could be an intellectually meaningful moment is because of the anticipatory efforts of this founding generation. This is not to say that Armand Mauss or most others of Mormon Studies' founding generation spent every waking moment thinking about Mormonism. Precisely because the field did not exist, he and others had to earn their stripes by working in decidedly non-Mormon fields. Armand cut his teeth doing cutting-edge research on social problems and deviant behavior, which now that I think about it, actually prepared him pretty well for studying Mormonism. He had done some early research on Mormon social attitudes, but largely set that work aside so that he could get a job and earn tenure. His first major book on Mormonism, The Angel in the Beehive, available for sale, was not published until the tail end of a long and productive career. Indeed, Armand was officially at retirement age when the book came out. He was almost 75 when All Abraham's Children, which some have called his magnum opus, was published. Now in his 85th year, we have his memoir, Shifting Borders and a Tattered Passport. And in the intervening decades, he idled away his time by publishing other books and several dozen articles, serving as the editor for the major academic journal in his field, and helping lead Dialogue, the flagship journal of Mormon intellectual life, through perhaps its most difficult phase. Oh, and he and Ruth raised 8 children. Feminists coined the phrase that the personal is political. For Armand Mauss, like many other scholars, the personal is academic. Armand has admitted that much of his scholarship, especially his Mormon Studies work, was born out of a desire to resolve some of the questions that developed in his own mind from his active participation in the Mormon community. Living in the Bay Area, Mauss experienced diversity in a way essentially unknown to the mid-20th century Mormon heartland. Even before Lester Bush's landmark 1967 article on Mormonism's so-called Negro doctrine, Armand reports that my own search of the LDS scriptural canon convinced me that neither the origin nor the doctrinal rationale for the priesthood and temple ban could be found in the scriptures unless they were read through the prism of accumulated post hoc folklore in the writings of 19th century LDS leaders. As early as 1964, and based on some of his early research on Mormon social attitudes, he came to believe that we must get rid of all the racist folklore that passes for doctrine. After many more years of research on Mormonism and race, making him arguably the foremost authority on the subject, he came to conclude that the policy of denying the priesthood to people of African ancestry was an unnecessary and completely avoidable burden upon the fundamental mission of the church. I haven't had the chance yet to talk to him about it, but Armand must feel at least somewhat gratified by the recent revisions in the LDS scriptures. In particular, surely it was unimaginable to him that the new preface to the 1978 Revelation would essentially authorize the argument that he and others had been making for so long, namely that the Book of Mormon teaches that all are alike unto God, including black and white, bond and free, male and female. Throughout the history of the church, people of every race and ethnicity in many countries have been baptized and have lived as faithful members of the church. During Joseph Smith's lifetime, a few black male members of the church were ordained to the priesthood. Sometimes it takes a few years, but pure research, when soundly conducted, often becomes applied, sometimes in surprising ways. Armand also sought to understand the dramatic changes internal to the church that he had remained actively loyal to since his boyhood. As he records in his memoir, I found it difficult, in general, to cope with the gradual displacement of the rational by the emotional element in the LDS ecclesiastical culture during my lifetime. Compared to the church of my boyhood and even of my missionary days, the current ecclesiastical culture seems to prefer tearful pulpit renditions of faith-promoting stories to the reasoned scriptural discourse of my youth. Today's pulpits, he notes, rarely feature a stack of scriptures for easy resort by the speaker, but the box of tissues is nearly universal. That says it all. Armand helped explain this and many more substantial shifts within the 20th century LDS Church through his theory of retrenchment, as articulated most fully in The Angel and the Beehive, which remains to date the most compelling interpretation of modern Mormonism. We'll hear more about that in the following session. Armand may have helped shape the field of Mormon studies, but in doing so, he wasn't always winning friends and influencing people. Laboring in the closing decades of a century in which the LDS Church was fumblingly trying to figure out what to do with its intellectuals, on multiple occasions he was called in to answer for himself to various stake presidents, often at the express order of senior members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Mauss approached these interviews with respect and cordiality, and for the most part had positive outcomes in which he successfully maintained both his loyalty to the church and his intellectual integrity. During one of these interviews, the stake president read a supposedly offending remark that Armand had made about the continuing damage of racist folklore in the church. When Armand admitted, candidly, that he had made such a remark, the stake president thought for a moment, then said, "Well, I can't see anything wrong with that." Always the professor, Armand then took the opportunity to educate the stake president about the academic study of Mormonism, and on the next Sunday provided him with a copy of one of his books and some back issues of Sunstone and Dialogue, discreetly delivered, he says, in a plain brown wrapper. Of course, not all of Armand's contemporaries got off so lightly with their bishops and stake presidents, and many became casualties of this period. For those scholars who also sought to maintain a relationship with the LDS Church, Mormon studies during most of Armand's lifetime was a dangerous occupation that came with its own hazard pay, namely the suspicion of fellow church members and leaders who not only failed to see the value in the academic approach, but often interpreted it as an act of hostility to the faith. Despite ambitions early in life to high church office, Mauss recalls that once he began publishing in Dialogue and researching sensitive topics like race, certain stake presidents or bishops of my acquaintance would periodically admonish me that I would never get anywhere in church leadership if I continued with such unauthorized topics and publications. They were right. I never regained the fast track to ecclesiastical privilege as a bishop, stake president, or other relatively high office, though I did serve in responsible positions at the ward level. Decades later, the tension is still not fully resolved. There is, as Mauss notes, a tremendous gulf between believing Mormons and academic scholars in the way that religious studies is understood. For Mormons, as for many other religious traditions with exclusivist claims, the purpose of studying religion is to find truth, and especially the one religion that is true and authentic above all others. Conversely, the object of an academic or scholarly study of religion is not truth, but understanding, in which the truth claims of any religion are simply acknowledged and taken into account, along with ritual, scripture, and all other aspects of a given religious culture or tradition. The purpose with the academic study of religion, Mauss notes, is not to support or refute such truth claims or any other aspects of a religion, but rather to understand them. The tension between faith and scholarship is hardly unique to Mormonism. Every religious tradition experiences it to some degree, and the academic discipline of religious studies has had a tortured relationship with living, breathing religion ever since its inception. But the conflict has perhaps been particularly poignant in Mormonism, precisely because the religion's truth claims are so wrapped up in a historical narrative that because of its modern origins is so wide open to critical scrutiny. And so, as Armand points out, the skepticism in academia about Mormon intellectual imperviousness is matched by grassroots Mormon skepticism about the value of an academic study of religion. With the lines so apparently clearly drawn, are we simply at an impasse? Must religion and religious studies forever be at odds? In the words of the ancient Hebrew prophet, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? To a large extent, it remains to be seen, and there may in fact be some fundamental and mutually incompatible differences between the two approaches that will never be resolved. Yet if Armand Mauss is anything of a prophet, which I know he does not claim to be, then on this score he's a voice of cautious optimism rather than of passive lamentation. After decades of living in the wilderness in between the Mormon kingdom and the ivory tower, Mauss offers a vision of hope. He writes, "If this mutual skepticism, or at least wariness, between grassroots Mormonism and academic religious studies is ever significantly relaxed, such will probably occur in settings like Claremont's School of Religion, not only through constructive relationships between believing LDS students and their faculty mentors, but also in relationships between the LDS professors and their colleagues on various faculties." I believe that Armand has dedicated the past decade of his life to Claremont precisely because of this vision. That if there is a rapprochement to occur between religious scholars and the religious worlds they study and often inhabit, then at least in the Mormon case it may well happen in settings like the one we're in this morning. Claremont is not the only place this can and will happen, but it is an early entrant into the field and will remain a site where certain conversations can occur that simply don't and probably can't occur in very many other places. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear presentations from a number of scholars who will reflect on some of the vexing questions that Armand Mauss has dealt with in his scholarship for the past several decades, and which continue to occupy an important position in the future agenda of Mormon studies. How do we tell the long-neglected but essential story of 20th century Mormonism? Ranging beyond tried and true historical methods, what theoretical models will be most useful in understanding Mormonism? To that end, what unique insights can autobiography and memoir offer in understanding Mormonism and the Mormon community in all its individual level richness? How do we bring greater sophistication and depth to our understanding of Mormonism's veil of tears, namely its fraught relationship with racial diversity? And in this new century, will Mormonism ever truly become the world religion that so many church leaders and scholars have claimed it to be? Or is it destined to remain perpetually a distinctly American ecclesiastical export? These and other questions will occupy our attention for the next day and a half. Armand Mauss's remarkable career has set the agenda for us, so now let us pursue the journey together. The conference is now open.